Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special summer edition of The Classroom. I'm your host, Dillon Dixon. And today I have joining with me class peer tutor David Eakin. Thank you for joining, David.
Of course, Dylan, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, for anyone who does not know you, which I think is probably kind of hard because you've been tutoring for so long. So, if anyone stepped foot in Office 231, they probably know who you are. But for anyone who's listening who may not know who you are, just give us a quick little intro on who you are and what you do at the Learning Center.
Yeah, so my name is David Eakin. I just graduated undergrad with a degree in finance, and I am pursuing a master's in business analytics at Rutgers Camden in the fall. And I've been working as a peer tutor, mainly tutoring math and statistics for the past 3 or so years.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And yeah, I mean, I know you've been active in there for as long as I've been. I think you were even you were tutoring there before I was even at Rutgers. So you've probably
I'm almost certain.
you're probably one of the most senior tutors that is at class. And so my first kind of like starter question for you when it comes to tutoring and the tutoring process is essentially like I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine it's pretty common during the week to have someone come in to a session and be completely convinced they're going to fail a course, like just totally bomb it or fail an exam. Is that fair to say?
It depends on the person, but I have definitely encountered students who are not so confident, would be a way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I know I was one of when I got tutoring from you, I was one of those people. I thought I was going to fail my statistics 2 class. So my question to you is like when you're in that situation, and it may not even be someone worrying about failing, but just they really don't have the confidence in their abilities to do well on an exam or in an assignment. How do you get them from that point, which is it's kind of hard to work with someone at that point because they don't think they have a shot, to kind of feeling like they can do this and grasp some of the very basic materials? How do you get them from point A to point B?
So actually, I think that's very funny, and your question kind of poses the answer. I think people end up focusing on B way too much, and instead of focusing on the path you took from A to B. And really, when I have students come to me, I try to focus on a more process oriented way of encountering the problems, especially statistics. Um, the process is the important part. Realistically, if you have the correct process, you're going to get the right answer. That's a given. So instead of focusing on, oh, this is the right answer, focus on how you get the right answer rather. And I find that makes students a little bit more at ease when you can start breaking things into chunks and steps instead of looking at it all big picture.
So overall, like it's probably more about the process than the result, even if it's like a grade result or something like that. What's more important is that you know how to do it and you can replicate that process.
Yes, absolutely. The grade will come if you can do that.
Yeah,
That's
no.
that's how I that's how I do all my own coursework. Don't get me wrong, I'm a college student too. I graduated with a good GPA. I do focus on my grades, but I don't focus on my grades while I'm studying. I kind of do my work, learn the processes and whatnot as best as I can, take the exams, and whatever happens, happens. If I know I'm putting in the work and I'm doing my best to learn the material, I live with those consequences.
I think that's a good way to look at it too, because I think, especially even just like going into tutoring, I think a lot of people assign tutoring with a certain kind of grade goal or like, use it as a benchmark of like, okay, if I have a C in this class or a D in this class, I absolutely have to get tutoring. Or if I have an A, I don't need tutoring or something like that. When a lot of times it really is about the process. And I'm curious, one of the things I wanted to ask you specifically, and because I know I'm sure you get people who are struggling in their grades, but you get other people that are traditionally A students or B students. Um, how how would you say? how would you kind of define when someone should get tutoring? Because I think a lot of times students who traditionally do better, they may feel like if they're coming up against a class that is like kind of difficult, they're like, oh, well, I've done well in the past. I can figure it out. But there is a certain point where you do need help. And how, in your experience, have you been able to identify when someone really does need help versus when they can do it on their own?
Well, over the past 3 years, I would say most people should really come to me when they're knee deep, not neck deep. And most people come to me when they're neck deep and expect to fix it all in an hour or two, and that's simply not the case. I think if you need some kind of clarifying question, schedule an appointment. The tutors that have availability at the time you want to schedule are more than happy to sit with you for 15 minutes and answer what you feel might be a stupid question not worth tutoring. But at the end of the day, it's our job. That's what we get paid for. Nothing is too stupid at class, right? That's what we get paid for. That's what we're here for. We're here to be helpful. We're here to help you guys learn the material.
I think that's I don't know. I think that's something really, and maybe you should put that on a shirt. Nothing is too stupid for class, because I mean, really, that is something that I think needs to be highlighted a little bit more. Because I know, at least from people that I've talked to, and just I think kind of the nature around tutoring and peer tutoring, even specifically in some ways, is just kind of this sense that, like, if I go to tutoring, I'm admitting that, like, I'm inferior in some way, that, because I don't understand these concepts, it's some reflection on my intelligence, when that's nothing. That couldn't be further from the truth. Like, there really is no such thing as a stupid question when you're in a tutoring session.
No, and not even just that, but I mean, I graduated with a 4.0 GPA in throughout my undergrad, and I still would ask my professors questions after class. Like there is no ground there for me to stand on realistically. Like I don't want to, to me, I'm here to learn, and asking questions is part of it. Not knowing things is part of it. It's just a matter of, do you want to seek the answer? And I think this is just general advice to any student, really. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You want to seek how to get the right answers and what this material is all about. And I'd say tutors, professors, whoever it is, are going to be more than happy to answer your questions if you're showing interest, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it too. I think especially professors. I think, at least from what I've noticed, um, just kind of, I don't know, I've always, for whatever reason, maybe it's because I want to be a professor when I'm older, like, I've always gotten along with professors, and I've felt like I've been able to foster a relationship with them early in the semester, so that if I do have questions, or if I'm struggling with something, that like line of communication's there. But I find that, at least during my time as a college student, I think there's this weird barrier that comes up sometimes between students and professors, where they feel like, the professor just hands out the assignments and that's it. Like, that you can't go in during office hours or say, like, hey, I'm really confused about this. Could we sit down for 10 minutes and talk about it? So I think that's a really important point that you made there.
Absolutely. And I honestly, if you're around a professor a decent bit and ask them questions or talk to them after class, you're gonna start to realize that professors are just people too.
Yes,
And
100%.
I think that people have this stigma that professors are like, they live in a different world than we do. That's farther from the truth than anything. They're people too. So they get when you have questions. And I'd say, at least at Rutgers Camden, the faculty is always pretty helpful and nice. I don't think I've had a negative experience with a professor ever.
Yeah, I mean, like, my negative experience has been very few and far between. Like, honestly, that's in like the top three things I would list as of like why I was happy I went to Rutgers Camden. Like, faculty would be like potentially number
Up
one.
there.
Like,
Yeah, I
it's
agree. I 100% agree with that.
at least for the business school. I don't know other school, but for the business school, like, the professors have been really, really good. And I think like I from what I've garnered anyways, they appreciate when you come with questions because it shows that you care.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so kind of I think this leads well into a question I have that's kind of more towards freshman students. And I kind of want to talk about a little bit from your experiences. Um, what would you recommend? And this is mainly for math, like math courses, because I think a lot of freshmen run into this where, they did their high school courses and now they're coming into a 4-year university, and the increase in difficulty in the math courses, like it's not exponential, but it's definitely significant in a lot of cases. I know I experienced that at Rutgers Camden, and I'm curious, how would you recommend kind of adjusting, I guess, to that increase in difficulty? Because I think a lot of times it shocks people, or at least kind of stops them in their tracks a little bit.
I know this is going to sound like a very cookie cutter generic answer, but more time and effort. Really, let's be real with ourselves here. As a freshman, you're used to spending 5 hours in the classroom, right? Give
Yeah,
or take 5 hours a week in the classroom for a given class. At college, you're going to get about 3 hours. So, it's more so you need to spend that 5 hours a week. It just so happens that 2 of those hours need to be on your own, be that doing homework or studying or whatever you got to do. But it's not like you can just show up to class, take notes, not ask any questions, and basically just exist in the back of the room and expect to succeed. You should be active, asking questions as the professor goes. Professors are more than happy, especially math professors. I would say if you ask them, hey, how did you get this number? Or what did you do here? Are more than happy to go back and explain if you missed it. And in general, I think that's a big part of it. I think students miss one thing and then it leads to them missing another thing because they didn't know the first thing. And then it starts to snowball to the point where then you don't know anything and you're neck deep with questions and feel like you're suffocating and feel like you're going to fail the course. When in reality, you just have to be okay with speaking up around your peers. And honestly, if you have a question, there are probably 5 other people in that room with the same question that don't want to say anything.
100%. Yeah, I've seen that happen.
So I really feel strongly that be the person that says it, because at the end of the day, you're helping your cohort. Um, that's about all I have to say on that. I would say just general advice for freshmen: just be ready to do more work on your own. I honestly, Dylan, like if I'm gonna be honest with you, I was terrified when I came into college. Like,
Really?
yeah, I graduated high school with great marks. I graduated undergrad with great marks, and now I'm pursuing grad school, and I'm hoping to keep that kind of performance up. But I was terrified. I thought college was going to be so impossibly difficult. I was never going to get an A in a class, and I was ready to just work for it as hard as I could. And I feel that I was probably a little over concerned at the end of the day. And looking back on it, I think a good rule of thumb is if you're spending 5 hours a day in the classroom in high school, you're going to spend 3 hours in the classroom at college, and you're going to be spending 2 to 3 hours by yourself. So just be ready to still have that time available. It's now just going to be on your own. It's not going to be with a teacher at the front of the room.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. Kind of like looking back on my experience, like first coming in, there definitely was that adjustment because I was the kid that barely paid attention in my math classes in 10th grade and still somehow managed an 89 on the exam. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I came in as a freshman, I was like, yeah, this is going to require more of me. But how would you recommend for people, having that requirement to work more independently? I think kind of goes hand in hand with seeking out tutoring, but even more than that, I think at times, you jump into the tutoring session, as a student, you get all this great information, and then you still have to take that information and still go back to your studying time by yourself
Working
and then
with
apply it
yourself.
in the exam. So
Yep.
how do you kind of like, in terms of information retention from a tutoring session, what are the best practices to ensure that you're stepping away from a tutoring session, not being like, oh, that was great, a great couple tips, but being like, okay, I now know how to do this on my own.
I mean, typically, I'd say most of the time I try to share whatever we do with the students so they can review it at their own leisure. That is one thing I really do try to do before I erase anything. Say, if you want to snap a picture, snap a picture. Make sure you have it somewhere. Make sure you have it written down if you want it written down. I cannot stress that enough. I'm not saying you have to take notes on what I say like it's a class, but I surely find it helps you be a little bit more engaged, a little bit more active, and retain what we do better.
That's interesting. Hmm. And so, like from a tutor's perspective, because some students that are listening to this may want to become tutors, or they may you know, just be getting started with tutoring. Would you recommend that they take notes on the session? I know they're teaching, but is there, like would you recommend that, they also share things to the student after?
Yeah, typically, obviously I'm talking more from a math statistics oriented session, but typically we're solving problems on the board, right? There's nothing stopping me from taking a picture of what's on the board and emailing it to the student. Or there's nothing stopping them from writing it down as we go through it and stopping me and asking questions. As a tutor, you're not exactly there to reinvent the wheel. You're there to shine a different light on the problems and maybe take things a little bit slower and a little bit more step by step than the professor would in class, and just fill in the gaps of understanding essentially. And so that is one piece of advice I would give to new tutors there. And yeah, I agree with you about maybe not so much taking notes. I think that's kind of depending on the nature of what you're tutoring. Maybe for English or history, it might be nice to have some meeting minutes with like key points. But for math or statistics, most of it's going to be up there because you're working through some kind of problem or whatnot. But I always try to make sure to get that back to the students.
Okay, so on the topic of new tutors, um, if a student wants to tutor and they have the grade requirements, they have the GPA requirements, all that kind of stuff, but it's been a little while since they've taken the course, how well do you think a tutor really needs to know like the course concepts to be comfortable in most teaching situations? Or do you think it's a situation where you jump in and you kind of feel your way through it as you go? Or should you go back and really kind of study the material if you're like, pretty fuzzy on it?
That's a great question. So I've definitely gotten some classes to tutor that I haven't even taken sometimes, if I'm going to be honest with you, just because someone wants tutoring, we want to offer the best service we can. So typically there will be a syllabus emailed out, and I'm using this as an example because sometimes I don't know anything about it. But if I can at least look at the syllabus, I'm like, oh, I might have an idea about this. And at the very least, you can teach yourself online. The internet is a very powerful tool. If you are academically inclined enough to be a peer tutor, you are also, I would say, for the most part, inclined enough to teach yourself doing some searching online. And if you're fuzzy on a class, refreshing old material shouldn't be too much of a problem. I do this during sessions sometimes. I mean, if I forget a formula or something like that, obviously I have the internet at my fingertips. It's not too hard to just Google the formula or whatnot, or the theorem or whatever it is, really, and then go back to working with the session and with the 2T.
And so generally speaking, then, like a new tutor shouldn't feel super freaked out or worried or
No.
embarrassed if they don't know something right off the bat, because like questions come, like I know I asked you a bunch of questions. I mean, you kind of typically knew them, but there were some times where you're just like, I don't know that, and that's okay, right?
Yeah, no, that's totally okay. And I search it up and we figure it out and we get back to it. I mean, you're not going to have all the answers. If you ask your professor some questions, they might not have an answer to that question off the bat. I mean, it happens. And I people make mistakes too. Don't feel like there's this pressure for you not to mess up. I mean, I've definitely during review sessions put something wrong on the whiteboard. People were too wrong to correct me, and I found my own mistake 15 minutes later as I was looking at it while we were done the problem, and then had to redo it. So it happens.
Well,
It happens.
remember that one time that we spent an hour trying to figure out what was wrong with a problem that we were working on, and it was something wrong in the computer?
Yes. Yes, I do. Oh God.
That was a fun time.
Forget it. How did that project end up that uh, we were doing, by the way? How did that end up?
We did good. We did really good. And you know what? This is actually it's great that we kind of stumbled on that, because I think this is a great example of how you may go into a tutoring session for one thing and come out with something completely different. So for context for people who are listening, so I had a marketing research class, which basically required me to do a group project kind of market research for a client. So we had to come up with something to research, and then we had to do a survey and then do statistical data on it. So it actually required some statistics. Now, I've gotten tutoring from David before on statistics too, but obviously market research you would think is somewhat different, but instead of kind of like just trying to look through my statistic notes myself, I scheduled a yeah, I guess yeah, it was during drop-in hour. So even though
Yeah.
it wasn't a tutoring session through Raptor Connect, or what will now be Navigate, even though it wasn't a scheduled tutoring session, I came in during drop-in hours and we kind of felt our way through the project, even though it was not 100%, what you're billed to tutor. I came to you and I was like, this requires some statistics and it's kind of a group project research thing. And David helped me through statistics. We kind of worked our way through it, even though that's not a class that he tutors. And the project ended up really well. And I genuinely, I'm not exaggerating. I think we would have gotten like a C or a D had I not come to you, because none of us knew what to do. I'm not joking. None of us knew what to do. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to text David and see if he knows.
Well, Dylan, none of it was anything you hadn't seen in stat two. It was just,
Presented in a
and this
different
is
way
what
and
I
it messed
tell
with my head.
students. Well, the thing is, it's very different when it's live.
Yeah.
Um, and that I think is the biggest thing that, especially with statistics, people are like, I'm never going to use this. This is so stupid. You, until you get to the point where you're working with live data, it can be much more difficult to discern what you're supposed to do. And that is why I tell students, you really, really, like, if you ever want to do anything data oriented, pay attention to your statistics class.
Honestly, it's funny because I was talking to someone else. I was gonna say a friend of mine, but she was also on the podcast, Amanda DeBellis. She mastered in psych, and we were having a conversation. It might have been on the show, I don't remember, but she's like, I had no idea I would have to use so much math in my psychology major. And she was like, I have
Yeah.
to use statistics all the time because we're doing research. So I
Yep.
statistics, I did not realize it, but it really is sneakily one of those things that everyone kind of needs to know in most cases.
Yep. In business and finance, typically it's more statistics grounds a lot of the finance theory. like how returns are normally distributed and things like that. But their returns are approximately normal. I believe it's log normal. Forget off the top of my head, but I'd say for any of you finance majors out there, know that statistics is a large part of the finance theory. In other fields, like if you go more towards data science, psych, economics, even, it has a very, very direct impact on research and modeling and whatnot. And even in like the business field, you're starting to see more of a takeoff in machine learning and statistics as the years go by. And I foresee that trend to continue. That's why I'm going to grad school for business analytics.
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely something that people need to keep their eye on. It's not just one of the classes in their, grouping of 16 over the course of 4 years. It's one of the ones you got to really pay attention to, because I ran into that where um I had done statistics one in community, and then I thought that I didn't have to take statistics two, and that I had to take it like 2 years later in my senior year. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that multiple classes would require this much statistics work. But saying all that to say, I think this is a good um, piece of information for both people new to tutoring and new to actually, tutoring other students. Things, like if you coming in for one subject, that subject may help in other areas, even if you weren't billed to do that. Even if the appointment, even if you don't have a tutor that is, appointed for your class, that doesn't mean that you can't come into the office, office 231 in Armitage, and just see if we can help out,
Ask
because a lot of times we will try to find a tutor that knows some of what is being talked about and kind of work through it together. Like you and I had an operations management class, which that was one of the courses I think that you weren't as familiar with, or it just had been a while. But you helped me in that class too at a couple different points, and we
Dylan.
kind of just worked through it. Even though you may be scheduled to tutor, as a tutor, you may have as a tutor, you may have classes that you're kind of supposed to tutor, but there are definitely times, especially during drop-in hours, where someone might come in with something that is related to what you do, and you just kind of have to help them through it. And there's definitely times where, you may be asked by, Angela or someone else to help in a class that you've never tutored before, if there's not a tutor for it. So never
Class
know.
you've never even taken before.
Yeah, yeah. Which I mean,
I think
I don't know how you do that.
I always, as long as it's remotely in my wheelhouse, I always appreciate it because typically I end up learning something. Like when Dylan and I were working through that market research project together, it helped me brush up a lot on my R skills. I learned a lot about a lot of packages that I didn't totally know a lot about and should have taught myself a while ago and didn't, and it made me learn how to use them.
Yep,
So I got quite a bit out of it.
there you go. And one other thing I want to kind of talk about in terms of from a tutor's perspective, but this also I'll ask this question from a tutor's perspective, and then from a student's perspective. For people who have never either conducted a group review session, or for people who've never attended one either, we'll start with from the tutor side. What should they expect if, for example, they're asked to lead an exam review session? Because that looks a little bit different than a one-on-one tutoring session.
Um, I would say when you're doing review sessions, I take a little bit more of a task oriented approach, and my goal is to try to get through the practice exam. If it's a one on one session, I can typically ask, do you want to do specific problems? And we can narrow the test down a little bit and do the specific problems a student would like to hone. But for a review session, you have to cater to everyone a little bit. So The one thing I would say is just be mindful of the clock and try to get as much done as you can. I don't mean rush through everything. Make sure you stop, ask, is everyone following? Biggest thing I will say, a lot of students will not speak up even if they don't know something. So I always, after a problem, I stop and ask, does this make sense to everyone? If you get crickets, there's nothing you can do about it, but you will get students who, if prompted, will ask questions. So at the very least, you can start to trigger a little bit more learning that way.
Yeah, that's good. That's good because I think I know I think at one point I don't know, I might be imagining this. I don't remember, but I think at one point I was possibly going to do like an exam review session. Oh no, yeah, yeah. When I was doing international marketing, that was there was a potential for that because I tutored for but it was for a very short amount of time. And I was like, this seems totally different from one-on-one. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna handle this. I never actually had to do it, but I was always curious of like, just operationally what the differences would be. And then like from a student's perspective, if you're coming in, how do you how do you make sure that, you're getting the specific questions that you had answered while also being mindful of everyone else because it's very different. I know I've been in exam review or not exam review sessions, but I've been in drop-in sessions with you where there's 5 or 6 different people that are, like requiring your attention. You're running around like a crazy person. And I have a bunch of questions that I have to get, answered, but you're only one person. And so it's a little bit different than a one-on-one session.
Um, would you like me to start with the student's perspective, correct?
Yeah.
I would say the best thing is try to pare your questions down as much as you can. The more specificity you can give me, especially when I'm strapped for time like that and I'm juggling 6 different people and like 5 different classes in my head at once, um, the more specificity you can have, the better. If it's a question like, oh, is this number right? Great. If it's something like, how do I get this? I need to know what this is specifically, right? That would be the number one thing I will say that would give you probably the best chance of getting your question answered when I'm juggling 5, 6 people doing drop-ins, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, that just makes everyone's life easier.
Yes. Good communication is key in a lot of parts of life. Who would have thought?
Yes. 100%. So last questions. This is like a little bit more of a fun one. I mean, they're all fun, but this one is kind of more focused, not quite on the academic part of tutoring, but just from like either a social aspect or people that you've gotten to know or experiences that you've had. Like, what's been your favorite part about tutoring? Because you must like something about it, because you've been doing it for this long.
Um, so I would say that I mean, just to clear the air about this, obviously, as a peer tutor, you get paid for it.
Of
Money's
course.
money. But I stay and I like it. It lets me meet new people, and typically I feel like I'm making a difference. That is one of the things that I do like about this job is that I typically can ask students how they did and see a tangible difference in their output after we work together. And to me, that's quite nice. It's very satisfying if that makes sense. Albeit it might be a small difference in the grand scheme of things, like in the whole world, but to me, it improves my quality of life and makes me feel better. It makes me feel like I'm doing a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, and as someone that has gotten tutoring very actively in my senior year, um, yeah, the difference is felt.
The
Um,
difference is felt.
it really is. I got I only ever got tutoring from you and from Pariti, and I'm also I graduated with honors and all that kind of stuff. So, like there were plenty of classes that I was able to handle on my own, but you know, I've said it before and I will say it again. I think both you and Pariti helped me save my senior year. Like really.
Thank
I mean, there were
that's what this is all about.
yeah, like I mean, there are times where I would, like I'm not exaggerating. For people listening, I'm not exaggerating. I would sit down at the table and David would be like, "Oh boy." I can see it
Oh
all over your face. You're stressed out of your mind. But we worked it out.
no, we do work it out. And that's what it's all about. These good sessions, these good times, making a difference. That's what it's all about. Not every session is going to be like that. Disclaimer to you new tutors. You are going to have sessions where you're like, I am doing these because I have to. But that's fine. There are highs and lows with every job. And I'd say there are more highs in this job than there are other jobs.
Definitely, definitely, for sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences, kind of like the ins and outs of tutoring. And, I think we struck a good balance because we're talking a little bit about the tutoring side, but also the student side. But I think talking about the process is like, to me, just as interesting because there's a lot that goes into it. So thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Is there anything else that, it could either be for new tutors or students that are considering getting tutoring, have never done it before. Is there anything else that you really want to shout out just about class and the whole process in general? If not, that's fine. But is there anything else that you feel like people on both sides really need to know about kind of what it is that we're doing here?
Don't be so nervous for both groups. New tutors, you don't need to freeze up. You're tutoring people within your age group. They just want help. You're not their professor. You're also not their friend. Maybe you are. I don't know. But don't feel that you need to be nervous. You are helping your peers. That's all. And the Learning Center lets us facilitate that. And for students, again, don't be nervous. Schedule tutoring. None of us bite. We're more than happy to help. And like we said earlier, nothing is too stupid for class. We should get a t-shirt for that. That is funny. But really, no, it's true. I really think that there's nerves on both sides, especially for younger students and younger tutors that are just starting out. And just take a breath. We're all in this together. We're all trying to help each other, and we're all just trying to do better and be better together.
That's right. And I think that's a great place to kind of end it for this time. But yeah, no, we're all in it together. And yeah, no, it's really just a team effort and professors included. That's something that
Absolutely.
I definitely want to highlight kind of going into the fall semester is like it's not students by themselves or tutors by themselves or professors, like it's all three literally just trying to improve the learning journey for everyone. So yeah, very well said.
Yep.
Very well said. All right. Well, thank you so much once again. I'm going to wrap this up here. Thank you for everyone listening. For new tutors, good luck. For freshmen coming in, for everyone, starting in the fall 2023 semester, good luck. And we will see you next time for, another episode, probably another episode sometime during the summer. We'll have another special edition of the classroom. And then, of course, we'll keep this going in the fall. So thank you guys so much for listening. And I will see you next time. Thank you again, David.
Thank you, Dylan.